And so I think that was the threat, and I think they did it in Oklahoma City as well.
So it's an open, and then cops spoke out and said the feds did it, and they'd murder them and torture them to death, and then laugh and say it was suicide, cutting them all open. Cop of the Year, Terrence Yakey and others. Oh, you saw feds there. Well, you're just dead. Cop of the Year, saved all those people. How about we torture you and find out who else knows what's going on? And their fellow cops shut their mouths and said, absolutely, murder us whenever you want. We love it, basically. But some police have exposed. It's just so pathetic to see this going on. But you're absolutely right. It is an open threat to everyone, and it is meant to be a threat to those of us that are in the know. But I think the elites were going according to an old paradigm, an old attack paradigm, an old attack profile when they had media dominance. Now they don't, and I really think that they are on the run on many fronts and are not very happy how 9/11 ended up for them.
I think you're absolutely right, and that has spread, as you say, into other areas. Their program for the Middle East has been disastrous. Their economic and financial program is entrapped. I mean, they can't get out. There's going to be a day of reckoning, and they know that, and that's why they're frantically running around. As Mr. Engdahl said, they're afraid they're going to lose their wealth and power. And Alex, it's people like you and I who are going to take their wealth and power away from them through our court system by exposing what they're doing.
Well, I mean, they realize that. That's why they're so dangerous, is they've gone to the point of no return. They've gone for broke, and they know that, and they say that. Their crimes are so huge that if they don't bring in full spectrum dominance, if they don't activate COG and totally dominate everybody, then they're openly saying they're cooked. So that's why it's the immovable object, going up against an immovable object. It is a collision. And if we just don't blink and just say, you know what, ramming speed, and put it in high gear and just pedal to the metal, I mean, there's no way we're going to lose, Bob.
I agree with that. It's just waiting them out and keeping the information coming. And I never thought that I would be projected into the spot that I am at my late age, being able to transport information, and primarily information in the financial world. There are others who specialize in other areas, just like Mr. Engdahl said earlier, that I'm not an expert in science, and neither am I. But we do what we can do, and it's great that we have someone to work with like yourself who is able to grasp many subjects and tell the people the real innards of what's going on in them.
Well, Bob, it's just really an honor to have you on as well. Okay, let's get into the economy, and I'm going to skip this next break coming up for Infowars.com listeners because, again, the information is so important. Breakdown, were you expecting this? Because you and others have been saying you expected them to take it over, but when were you expecting it? By that, were you expecting it now? Because some had said it was coming later. I don't remember what you said on the show, but you said they were going to take over Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And then what does this mean? Where's it going in the future? Bob?
The first announcement by the international forecaster was just 4 years ago. And I said that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were technically bankrupt. And everybody on Wall Street and in the Beltway knew that. And they needed Fannie and Freddie to execute the real estate bubble, which was going to keep the economy from collapsing for the next 5 or 6 or 7 years. And so they continue to have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac take on mortgages, and as time went on over this past 4-year period, they took on more speculative mortgages, which made their situation even worse. The figures, the numbers, the balance sheet in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac both were bogus. Their derivative positions...
Bob, stop. Bob, go to derivatives in a minute. But they needed to loosen up on loans to keep the bubble going, correct? And now is this the final bubble, bringing the big Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac bubble within the Treasury, which internationalizes it? Or is the final bubble the green carbon tax, which they're saying will pay to the banks?
It's hard to say at this time. I just know with what they've got already, they're in serious trouble. And
okay, you got to derivatives. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the derivatives, they just made terrible mistakes in purchasing and writing them. And Raines, who was the head of Fannie Mae, who was dismissed, he executed the first part of it. They were balancing or harmonizing earnings as well. And I knew what they were into as far as the mortgages was concerned, and I knew their position was financially irretrievable. I never really thought it would get as bad as it has now. And they have $5.2 trillion worth of mortgages. They will probably have, I would say a conservative estimate would be about 35% will turn out to be bad. So, we're looking at
$2 trillion,
close $2 trillion. And on top of that, they have allowed the shareholders to lose almost all their money. They have allowed the preferred holders to probably lose all their money, and a lot of them are banks.
All right. Well, I'm sorry for interrupting, but is it 2 or 3 trillion? Because my math would be $2.5 trillion.
Yeah, 2.5, and that's a good figure. It could go as high as 4, but I baseline it at 2 and say it'll be 2 or more, and that'll take 5, 6, 7 years.
But how much does that infect? I mean, that's only $2 trillion on the mortgages. Then they sold bonds. They sold those packages, and I've seen some reports say it's 50 trillion. Some say it's 25 trillion. I mean, how big is the domino effect?
The domino effect could be as large as those figures that you've mentioned. I'm just going for the base facts. I mean, that's enough to compel anybody to have a spinning headache.
Well, I actually have one right now.
The preferred holders are $36 billion. I don't see any way the government can't come in. They've got to come in and bail those people out. Because if they don't, a whole bunch of banks are going to go under that wouldn't go under.
All right, let's keep talking about it right now. Here we go with Bob Chapman. Keep rolling, Bob. Keep rolling. Just keep going.
And also, of $1.3 trillion, around figures, of bonds, those bonds, over $800 billion worth are held by foreigners. And I think that's what brought this thing to a crescendo. I mean, it had been going on for a long time.
So you're saying they had to.
Said to them, look, you better guarantee those bonds or you got a serious problem.
Here's the $64 million. Here's the $64 million question. Then we'll go back, Bob, and I'll let you roll. Here's the $64 million question. And I want to answer this when we come back from break. But right now, you can keep going over the Chinese and what we're saying. But before I forget, because I write notes here and then forget, when we come back, when or if, how long till this eats through, this time bomb, until they see the Treasury is insolvent with all the crap they're dumping on it? Or will it just go on forever, and then because it's the government backing it, it won't matter if it's all fraud, and then we enter a la-la land where any investment, including used birdcage liner, is as good as gold. So, I mean, you see my question. Let's answer that in 3 minutes, but continue answering with the Chinese saying, look, we're holding this. Go ahead.
And I think they pushed them into it. And I don't think that they wanted to do that 2 months before an election. And so I don't think they had any other choice. And I think that was probably the compelling factor. Another thing is that the Chinese have been, again, buying dollars with yen in order to suppress the value of yuan, I should say. And the reason they're doing that is to continue to be competitive. Because they're starting to run into some pretty stiff competition offshore. And, of course, too, their banking system's got problems I won't even go into here, which is as bad as the Japanese had in 1992. And that's because Communist Party members get loans and never pay them back. And so China was saying, look, you got to honor these bonds, and on the other hand, we're going to buy dollars because we want to keep our currency down, and by doing so, we'll buy treasuries with that money. And so they were a support mechanism on one side by buying the treasuries, but on the other, they wanted protection on their Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bonds. And so I think that's what compelled